So this is the review session for Ms. Turner's AP class, Unit 1 exam. There'll be 36 multiple choice questions that will be done on a Scantron, and then 2 FRQs. You'll have 50 minutes to get those done, just like we've been practicing. What you'll need to know: the philosophers and the early psychologists, the old crusties as I like to call them, just briefly, what did they do? What did they contribute to psychology? Make sure you look back at your binder page 4 on how they had some opposing views such as nature and nurture, or dualist and monist and so forth, such as the examples I have down there for you. So that would be just a good thing to recognize. For the perspectives, how does each study the behavior? These are like the finger things you learned in intro psych, plus we've added just a few. They're not the same thing as a career or a domain, so just make sure you're reading the questions carefully with that. The 2 oldest ones are going to be the elements and the purpose, so that's going to be structuralism and functionalism. The emerging after the old schools are going to be training behaviors. If anytime we focus on behavior, that's behaviorism. The sum of the parts is the gestalt. Unconscious motives is psychoanalytic. And supportive environment, I'm going to love you right through it, that's the humanist. The contemporary, or those perspectives gaining grounds, mental process is going to be cognitive. The brain is the biological. Trends over the different generations is evolutionary. Ethnic influence is sociocultural. Staying healthy is positive psychology, a little more research-based than humanism. Moving on to the subfields and the domains. Now this is, connected but yet their own distinct area. Make sure you do know the difference between basic and applied. Am I just trying to get general knowledge, or am I trying to fix a specific problem? And some of these subfields can fall into either one of these, so just make sure you look very careful at these. As far as careers go, this again is review from intro psych, so it's not brand new stuff. Make sure that you are careful with this. A school counselor is not a school psychologist or a counseling psychologist, so if you tell me that on the FRQ, it won't count, so watch out for that. Look over any questions in your binder, as well as the review and the matching that we have done. For research components, again, a lot of review from not only your science classes, but also intro psych. Some concepts you need to know that hurt research results: hindsight bias, the I knew it all along feeling. Overconfidence, we're more confident than we are correct. I want you to be confident going into the test, but I also want you to be correct, so you've got to use research to find out if that's true. The 2 big categories of correlational methods versus experimental methods. There's a poster in the front of the room. Make sure you use that. Well, hopefully you won't need to, but so correlation, remember, correlation is not ever causation, and most research methods are unfortunately correlational because of working with human behavior. Experimental has so much control over the environment that they can at least try to prove cause and effect, and there's only 2 types of those: blind studies and laboratory observations. Differences in methods. Oh, make sure you know how they are different. How does a laboratory study differ from a blind study? How does a cross-sectional study differ from a cultural study? The illusory correlation. Things that a lot of times with anecdotal evidence, we hear it once, so we think that there is a cause and effect. If I smile at Miss Turner, then I will get an A. That is an illusory correlation. There you go. Notice events that support our illusions. Paul erroneously believes that people texting him is positively correlated with his dreaming about them. Which one is he more likely to notice? This is very similar to a multiple choice question that you're going to have. So what supports that? Components to research. Make sure you write that hypothesis in that if-then format. That leaves absolutely no doubt in my mind that you know what you're talking about. Also, when you're trying to establish this, you want to use the present or future tense, not the past tense, because you always write your hypothesis before you conduct the research. If independent variables found in the if part, dependent variables found in the then part, and we've got those confounding variables that get in the way of us doing our experiments. We don't like those, but we've got to be careful when we're looking at how valid an experiment is. For experimental and control groups, remember they're both going to reflect the independent variable. It will be present with the experimental groups. It will not be present in the control groups. Operational definitions, we've had some fun reviewing those. Remember, that's taking the variables and making sure it is written down in a way that is specific and measurable, something involving numbers, something quantifiable. That's your operational definition. So if you want to do an operational definition for flirting, you know, first of all, what is flirting, and then how long do I have to do it, that sort of thing. Sampling options. Unfortunately, most samples are biased. Not everyone has an equal chance of being part of it, which they would if it were random. And remember those representative options where my demographics in my population are matched to the demographics in the sample. So if I have 75% of people that are males in my population, I need to have 75% of males in my sample. That's going to be a representative idea. Generalizability. What does it mean? Well, can I take the results from this experiment and generalize it back to the larger population? There's certain things that help, certain things that hurt generalizability. Things that help it are random sampling, large samples, and multiple samples. Look at your binder sheet on page 10 and 11 for some good practices. For ethics, again, you learned these in intro, but I can't let you forget them. Why do we substitute animals for people? Well, sometimes things are just unethical to do to people. So like separating them from their mothers, that sort of thing. Ethical rules there are ethical rules used for animals. That is absolutely true. There are several aspects to informed consent. They are the three that I have included below there. You need to know what you're doing. You do have to be informed of your right to decline, and you have to be informed that confidentiality will be kept. You cannot have any mental or physical harm. And deception really isn't great, but sometimes it is necessary. The only times you can use it is if by knowing the truth, people would change their behavior, and if you debrief afterwards, although you should always debrief anyway. Statistics, everybody's favorite. Remember, we have descriptive statistics that are just describing a large set of data. So we have our measures of central tendency, the mean, the median, and the mode. The day of the week that most students come in for help would be, hopefully you said a mode. What's most affected by the extremes? Hopefully you answered the mean. Variability, we have two types of variability. We have the range, which is the low score minus the high score, and we have standard deviations, which is much better. When I'm showing consistencies, that standard deviation is going to be best. There will be a multiple choice question about, I think, bowling scores or something of that nature. If I'm looking at how consistently I'm doing that, I want to look at my standard deviations because that'll tell me how spread out or how condensed the scores are. Correlation coefficients, okay, remember correlation is not causation. Positive, both of them increase or both of them decrease. Negative correlation, one increases when one decreases. And then the strength, the closer to zero, the weaker the correlation. The closer to either positive or -1, the stronger the correlation, represented by a small letter R. Scatter plots, make sure that, and this will be on the, not only our exam, but most likely on the national exam as well. Scatter plots always show two variables, okay? If it's a frequency distribution, that's just the frequency of one variable, but scatter plots are going to show me the relation between two variables. Inferential statistics, don't need to know a whole lot about this other than probability, how likely is it to happen. This is best for, or excuse me, which is best for smaller, with probability, also remember we want a small probability of the outcome happening by chance. And that secret number, well, not so secret, is equal to or less than 0.05 for probability. What's best for standard deviation? Small or large? We want small. The smaller the deviation, the more concise the scores. For correlation coefficient, said this earlier, the closer to either positive or -1, the stronger the correlation. P-value, I just said this as well, 0.05 is the significant value that means the chances of this occurring are very, very small without us interfering. And I do have, hopefully have put the practice sheet online. If not, be sure to ask me about that. There will likely be charts, not necessarily on our tests, although you should be pretty used to those, but I know there'll be some on the national exam. And so how can each of these factors hurt the validity of research? Smaller bias samples, they're going to hurt. They're going to hurt the validity. Confounding variables, they're going to hurt the validity. We have other things that are causing the outcome. Correlational research methods, all we're doing is saying what could be related, not what is cause and effect. How many variables are depicted in a frequency distribution? I keep giving these answers too early. The answer to this one is 1. Scatter plots show 2, frequency distribution show 1. Pie charts, they only show percentages, so I can't do that with whole numbers. It's always percentages. Normal distribution, make sure you know the percentages of a standard bell-shaped curve. What falls between the mean and the +1 standard deviation, +2 standard deviation, and so forth. You've got a nice chart that you colored on that. Z-scores is just another name for the distributions here. Skewed distributions, now remember these are the opposite of scatter plots in the line of best fit. Skewed distributions, again, only show one variable. And what do they mean? So as if it's skewed to the left, what does that mean? Remember that the tail of the skew is pulling it in the direction so that the most frequent answer, the bump, if you will, is where most people score, but if it's being pulled in a positive direction, that means few people scored higher. Negative skewed means that few people scored lower. I think I just said that wrong. Shoot. Okay, I did say that right. Negative skew, most people did well, but a few people did poorly, so they're pulling it in the negative direction for that skewed. Already said that, opposite of scatter plots. And so your practice essay, remember you want to be as clear and concise as you can, making sure you leave everything you know on that paper so there's no doubt in the grader's mind, because I won't always be your grader. So if you want to do any practice, design an experiment to test if drug T helps to reduce hyperactivity. That's a hypothetical situation. Discuss the following things. Sampling, again, is it biased? Is it representative? Is it random? What's the IV and the DV? Can you come up with operational definitions for those? What are the different ways to evaluate and avoid bias? Another thing is to select a subfield of psychology, decide if it's basic or applied. How can two of the perspectives, the finger things, relate to the subfield? And how would two people in the roots of psychology, the old crusties, contribute to that area? Whew, that's a lot. I will also put the slides on my Google site. So if you want to just look at the slides as well, you can do that. So that's the end for unit exam number 1. Thanks.